My family turned my graduation dinner into a calculated humiliation, handing me a barely passed gift bag while laughing at my struggle. I didn't cry. Instead, I left an envelope on the table that revealed I was their biggest competitor's newest hire, and I walked out forever. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence in the auditorium was heavy, the kind that presses against your eardrums and makes your own heartbeat sound like a war drum. I sat in the velvet-covered seat, my knuckles white as I gripped the armrests, waiting for my name to be called. Around me, the air was thick with the scent of cheap perfume, stale coffee, and the electric buzz of nervous energy. Families were huddled together, whispering excited encouragements, adjusting tassels, and double-checking camera angles. I checked the empty seats to my left for the 10th time in 10 minutes. They were still empty. Of course they were. I had sent the date, the time, and the location to the family group chat 3 months ago. I had sent a reminder 2 weeks ago. I had sent a final confirmation yesterday. And yet, as the Dean of Architecture stepped up to the podium, adjusting the microphone with a sharp screech of feedback, the 3 seats reserved for the closest members of my family remained conspicuously vacant. I felt a familiar, cold ache settle in the pit of my stomach, not surprise exactly, but the dull, throbbing confirmation of a disappointment I had been bracing for. I was 24 years old, graduating top of my class from one of the most rigorous architecture programs in the country, and I was doing it alone. Naomi, the dean's voice boomed, slicing through my thoughts. I stood up. My legs felt heavy, like they were filled with lead. I walked across the stage, the bright spotlights blinding me, turning the audience into a dark, faceless ocean. I shook the hand offered to me, accepted the diploma that represented 4 years of sleepless nights, caffeine overdoses, and brutal critiques, and forced a smile that felt like it might crack my face open. There was polite applause. No cheers, no air horns, no one screaming, "That's my girl," just the polite, obligatory clapping of strangers. As I walked off the stage and back to my seat, my phone buzzed in the hidden pocket of my gown. I pulled it out, shielding the screen with my hand. It was a text from my stepbrother, Philip. "Dinner at Le Bernardin, 8:00 p.m. Don't be late, Dad hates waiting." That was it, no congratulations. No sorry we missed the ceremony, just a command and a location. I stared at the screen, the pixels blurring slightly as my eyes burned. I was exhausted, physically, mentally, and emotionally depleted. I had spent the last week running on adrenaline and 3 hours of sleep to finish my final thesis model. I was in a vulnerable state, my defenses stripped away by fatigue. I wanted to go home, curl up in my bed, and sleep for a week. I wanted to order takeout and watch a mindless movie. But I knew I couldn't. If I didn't show up, I would never hear the end of it. It would be cited as yet another example of my ungratefulness, my lack of family values, my emotional instability. I took a deep breath, inhaling the dust of the old theater. I typed back, "I'll be there." I didn't know it then, but as I walked out of that auditorium, clutching my degree like a shield, I was walking toward the end of my life as I knew it. The betrayal waiting for me at that dinner table would be worse than the diagnosis of the loneliness I felt right now. It wouldn't just break my heart. It would shatter the illusion of family I had been clinging to for decades. Le Bernardin was exactly the kind of place my father, Frederick, loved. It was cold, expensive, and designed to make you feel small if you didn't have the right watch on your wrist. The lighting was dim, the tablecloths were a blinding, crisp white, and the waiters moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency. I arrived exactly at 8:00 p.m. I had changed out of my graduation gown in the university bathroom, slipping into a modest black dress and a blazer I had bought on sale. I looked professional, I thought, respectable. As the hostess led me through the dining room, I spotted them at a large, circular table near the back. They looked like a picture from a a magazine about people who have too much money and not enough empathy. Frederick was at the head of the table, nursing a scotch, checking his phone. He didn't look up as I approached. Elena, my stepmother, was next to him, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my entire tuition for the semester. She was laughing at something Philip had said. Philip, my older stepbrother, looked as smug as ever, leaning back in his chair with an air of unearned confidence. And then there was Sophia, my stepsister, the golden child, taking a selfie with her wine glass, finding the perfect angle to show off her new bracelet. "Hello," I said, my voice sounding small in the cavernous room. The conversation didn't stop immediately. It trailed off, slowly, as if my presence was a minor inconvenience they had to adjust to. "You're late," Frederick said, finally looking up. His eyes, cold and gray, scanned me from head to toe. "We already ordered appetizers." "It's 8:00 on the dot," I said, checking my watch. "And traffic was bad coming from the ceremony." "The ceremony," Elena said, waving her hand dismissively as if swatting away a fly. "Right, how long was it? Those things are always so tedious. That's why we decided to just meet you here. Much more civilized." "It was fine," I said, taking the only empty seat. It was positioned awkwardly, slightly out of the circle, as if it had been added as an afterthought. "I graduated with honors." "That's nice, dear," Elena said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness she perfected years ago. It was the tone one uses for a toddler who successfully uses the potty. "We're all very surprised." Philip snorted into his drink. "Surprised is one word for it. I still remember when you failed that math test in 10th grade. I thought for sure you'd end up working retail." "Architecture is a lot of math, Philip," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I handled it fine." "So you say," Philip replied, smirking. "But let's be honest, Naomi. It's an art degree with a fancy name. Dad builds skyscrapers. You draw pretty pictures." I looked at my father, waiting for him to correct Philip. Frederick owned one of the largest real estate development firms in the city. He knew exactly what architects did. He knew the rigor. But he just swirled his drink, a faint smile playing on his lips. "Let's not argue on her big night," Frederick said, though his tone suggested I was the one starting the argument. "We have a gift for you." My heart did a traitorous little leap. A gift? For a second, a split second, I thought maybe I had misjudged them. Maybe they were actually proud. Maybe the coldness was just my exhaustion talking. Elena reached under the table and pulled out a glossy, expensive-looking gift bag. She slid it across the white tablecloth toward me. The bag was heavy. "Go on," Sophia giggled, her phone now recording. "Open it." I reached into the bag. My fingers brushed against tissue paper. I pulled out a heavy, leather-bound book. I frowned. It looked like a portfolio case. But then I saw the customization. Embossed in gold foil on the front cover were the words, "Barely PASSED." I stared at it, my breath hitched in my throat. I opened the cover. Inside, instead of a notebook or a planner, it was filled with brochures. Brochures for temp agencies. Flyers for barista courses. A pamphlet titled "So You Need a Backup Plan." The table erupted in laughter. It wasn't a warm, family laugh. It was a jagged, cruel sound. Philip was slapping the table. Sophia was covering her mouth, shaking with mirth, her phone lens zoomed in on my face. Even Frederick was chuckling, a deep, rumbling sound that vibrated in his chest. "It's a joke, Naomi," Elena cried, wiping a tear from her eye. "Oh, look at your face. You're so serious all the time." "We just wanted to be realistic," Frederick said, his chuckle fading into a patronizing smirk. "Honestly, Naomi, we didn't think you'd make it this far. We all assumed you'd drop out by junior year. This is just preparation for the real world. You're not cut out for the high-pressure environments. You're too soft." I sat there, frozen. The humiliation burned under my skin, hot and prickly. They had planned this. They had gone out, spent money, and custom-ordered a prop just to mock my achievement on the night I should have been celebrating. I looked at the gift, then I looked at them. They saw a victim. They saw the quiet, stuttering girl I used to be. They saw someone they could kick around because they paid for her tuition, or at least, they had until I took out loans to cover what they refused to pay. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that I was observant. They had forgotten that while they were busy looking in the mirror, I had been watching them. And more importantly, they didn't know what I was carrying in the inside pocket of my blazer. I felt the sharp corner of the envelope pressing against my ribs. It was a white, unassuming envelope, but it contained a nuclear bomb that was about to level their entire perception of me. "You really didn't think I'd make it?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Oh, honey," Elena said, reaching out to pat my hand, though I pulled it away before she could make contact. "It's not that we don't love you, we just know your limitations. We're trying to protect you from disappointment when the real world eats you alive." "Limitations," I repeated. I looked down at the table. The white tablecloth was pristine. I was about to stain it with something they would never be able to wash out. To understand why that moment at the table was so shattering, you have to understand the 24 years that led up to it. I was the oops baby, the product of Frederick's first marriage to my mother, a quiet, artistic woman who died when I was 6. Frederick remarried Elena less than a year later. Elena came as a package deal with Philip and Sophia, her children from a previous marriage. From the moment they moved into our house, the dynamic was set. Elena was the queen, Frederick was the king, and Philip and Sophia were the princes and princesses. I was the scullery maid who was allowed to eat at the table. I spent my childhood trying to earn my place. When I was 10, I spent weeks painting a portrait of the family for Frederick's birthday. I worked so hard on getting the shading right on his suit. When I gave it to him, he glanced at it, said, "Why is my nose so big?" and put it in a pile of papers. 2 days later, I found it in the recycling bin. When Philip got a C in math, they hired him a private tutor from the university. When I got a B+ in science, Elena told me I obviously wasn't applying myself and grounded me for the weekend. It wasn't just neglect. It was an active campaign to define me as lesser. Elena was the architect of my isolation. She was a master of the backhanded compliment. She would introduce me to her friends as, "This is Naomi, Frederick's daughter. She's spirited." She made sure I knew that my hair was too frizzy, my fashion sense was too dull, and my interests were weird. She was an interior designer. A visionary, she called herself, but really she just bought expensive furniture and arranged it in beige rooms. She hated that I actually understood structure, light, and form. She felt threatened by anything she couldn't control. Frederick, my father, was worse because his cruelty was indifferent. He was a man who measured worth in dollars and status. He loved Philip because Philip was a carbon copy of him, loud, aggressive, and willing to cut corners to get a deal done. He loved Sophia because she was beautiful and married well, enhancing the family image. Me, I was awkward. I read books. I didn't care about galas. And when I chose architecture, he took it as a personal insult. "Construction is a man's world, Naomi," he had told me when I applied to college. "You don't have the spine for it. You'll cry the first time a contractor yells at you." He refused to use his connections to help me get internships. "I won't put my name on the line for you until you prove you're not going to embarrass me," he said. So, while Philip was handed a vice president title at 25, I was working 3 jobs to pay for my supplies and interning for free at small firms just to get hours. I sacrificed everything to prove him wrong. I missed parties. I lost friends because I was always in the studio. I developed an ulcer from the stress of maintaining a 4 GPA while working night shifts at a library. I did it all with the desperate, pathetic hope that one day he would look at me and say, "Good job." But looking at him now, across this table at Le Bernardin, I realized that day would never come. Frederick was leaning back, swirling his scotch, looking at me with that same mixture of pity and disdain. He looked polished, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his suit tailored to the millimeter. But underneath the expensive fabric was a man who enjoyed seeing his own daughter fail because it validated his worldview. If I failed, he was right. And Frederick loved being right more than he loved me. You know, Philip said, breaking the silence, Dad was saying there might be an opening in the mailroom at the firm. If you really get desperate, we could probably squeeze you in, but you'd have to actually show up on time. Sophia giggled. Can you imagine Naomi in the mailroom? She'd probably get a paper cut and sue us. We'd have to check with HR, Alina added, sipping her wine. Nepotism is frowned upon unless the candidate is exceptional. They were enjoying this. They were feeding off my silence. They thought I was stunned into submission. They thought I was going to hang my head, accept the barely passed bag, and beg for that mailroom job. I looked at the waiter refilling my water glass. I looked at the chandelier above us. I took a slow, deep breath. The sadness I had felt earlier was evaporating. In its place, a cold, hard clarity was forming. It was like the structure of a building revealing itself after the scaffolding is taken down. I saw the load-bearing walls of their insecurity. I saw the cracks in their foundation. Mailroom, I said softly. What was that? Frederick asked. I said the mailroom, I said, louder this time. I reached for my water glass and took a sip. That's a generous offer, Philip, but I don't think I'll be needing it. Oh, Frederick raised an eyebrow. Do you have a lineup of firms begging for you? Because the market is tough, Naomi, especially for mediocre graduates. I do have a job lined up, actually, I said. Alina rolled her eyes. Starbucks doesn't count, sweetie. It's not Starbucks, I said. I set my glass down. And it's not a temp agency. I reached into my blazer pocket. My hand closed around the envelope. The paper felt cool and smooth. In fact, I continued, my voice gaining strength, it's a position that comes with a significant signing bonus. Enough to pay back every cent you loaned me for my freshman year tuition, and enough to pay for this dinner. Frederick stopped swirling his drink. His eyes narrowed. He was a shark and he sensed a shift in the water. He didn't like surprises. What are you talking about? He demanded. I'm talking about the fact that I've been busy, Dad. While you were betting on my failure, I was building my future. I pulled the envelope out. This was the moment, the pivot point, the fulcrum upon which the rest of my life would turn. I wasn't just a daughter seeking approval anymore. I was an architect, and I was about to demolish their house of cards. To understand the weight of that envelope, and why my hand didn't shake as I held it, you have to go back 3 months. You have to understand that my paranoia, as Alina called it, was actually intuition. It started in March. I had applied to 5 mid-sized firms in the city. I had a 4 GPA. I had a portfolio that my professors called visionary. I had strong references from the few freelance clients I had managed to scrape together on my own. On paper, I was a perfect candidate for a junior associate role. But I got rejected by all 5. Not just rejected, ghosted, or sent generic, automated rejections within an hour of submitting my application. It didn't make sense. Students with lower grades and weaker portfolios were getting interviews. I was getting radio silence. I started to suspect that my last name, which I shared with Frederick, was a double-edged sword. In this city, Frederick's reputation was complicated. He was powerful, yes, but he was known for being litigious, ruthless, and difficult. I wondered if firms were avoiding me because they didn't want to deal with Frederick's daughter. But then I found the email. I was at the family house one Sunday for a mandatory brunch. Frederick had left his iPad unlocked on the kitchen island while he went to take a call. I was looking for a recipe, but the screen was open to his email outbox. I saw my name in the subject line of an email sent to the managing partner of Kaufman and Associates, one of the firms I had applied to. My heart hammering against my ribs, I tapped it open. David, I saw Naomi applied to your firm. Do me a favor and toss it. She's unstable. Lots of personal drama, doesn't take direction well. I'm doing you a favor. She needs to learn the hard way before she's ready for a real firm. Let her sweat it out for a year or 2. I felt like I had been punched in the throat. He wasn't just refusing to help me, He was actively sabotaging me. He was calling in favors to ensure I failed, just so he could be right about me being not cut out for it. He wanted to break me, force me to come crawling to him for that mailroom job or a handout so he could control me forever. I didn't cry, I didn't confront him. I closed the email, wiped my fingerprints from the screen, and walked out of the kitchen. That was the moment the victim died, and the strategist was born. If Frederick was going to use his name to block me, I wouldn't use his name at all. I looked up the one firm Frederick hated more than any other, Sterling and Hallow. They were the antithesis of my father's company. Where Frederick built cheap, fast, and massive, Sterling and Hallow built sustainable, innovative, and artistic structures. They were Frederick's direct competition for high-end municipal contracts. Frederick hated Arthur Sterling with a passion that bordered on obsession, mostly because Arthur had beaten him for the city library contract 5 years ago. I knew applying there as Naomi Father's last name would be risky. They might think I was a spy, or they might just hate me by association. So I did something drastic. I submitted my portfolio under a pseudonym, N. Rose, my middle name. I removed all family references. I let the work speak for itself. The interview process was brutal. 3 rounds of technical assessments, a design charrette, and a panel interview. For weeks, while my family mocked me for not having any prospects, I was sneaking out to meet with the partners at Sterling. I remember the final interview with Arthur Sterling himself. He was an older man, kind eyes but sharp as a tack. He looked over my final rendering, a proposal for an urban vertical garden. "This is exceptional W. Orc Ms. Rose," he said, "but HR tells me there's a discrepancy with your background check. Your name isn't Rose." I sat up straighter, this was it. "No, sir, my name is Naomi, my father is Frederick." The room went silent. The other partners exchanged looks. Arthur Sterling took off his glasses and cleaned them slowly. "Frederick's daughter," he said, his voice unreadable. "Does he know you're here?" "No," I said clearly. "And he won't. My father is currently blacklisting me from other firms because he wants me to fail. He wants me dependent on him. I came here because you value innovation and he values obedience. I am not my father, Mr. Sterling, and if you hire me, I will work twice as hard as anyone else just to prove that." Arthur studied me for a long, agonizing minute. Then, a slow smile spread across his face. "I know your father," Arthur said softly, "and I know he's a bully. I've seen him do it to contractors, and I'm not surprised he's doing it to his own blood." He tapped my portfolio. "We don't hire names here, Naomi. We hire talent. And this is talent." He slid a folder across the desk. It was an offer letter, junior architect, a starting salary that was nearly double the industry standard, and a signing bonus. "Welcome to the team," Arthur said. "We're going to build great things, and," he winked, "it's going to drive Frederick absolutely insane." I had walked out of that office walking on air. I had kept the secret for 3 weeks, enduring the insults, the barely passed bag, the smug looks from Philip. I held onto that secret like a weapon, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And now, looking at Frederick's smug face across the dinner table, I knew the moment had arrived. "A job," Elena laughed, a high-pitched, nervous sound. "Oh, honey, did you get a shift manager position at the Gap?" "Open the envelope, Frederick," I said, ignoring her. I pushed it further across the table, past the bread basket, past the barely passed bag, until it rested right next to his Scotch glass. Frederick stared at me. The amusement was fading from his eyes, replaced by a flicker of annoyance. He didn't like that I wasn't crying. He didn't like the steel in my voice. "I don't have time for your games, Naomi," he grumbled. But curiosity, or perhaps the need to ridicule me further, got the better of him. He picked up the envelope. He tore the seal with a sharp rip. He pulled out the heavy, cream-colored stationery. I watched his eyes scan the header. I saw the exact moment the words Sterling and Hallow registered in his brain. His face didn't just pale, it went gray. The muscles in his jaw locked so tight I thought his teeth might shatter. He stopped breathing for a solid 5 seconds. "What is it?" Philip asked, leaning forward, sensing the shift in atmospheric pressure. "Is it a lawsuit? Did she get arrested?" Frederick didn't answer. He read the letter. Then he read it again. His hands, usually so steady, began to tremble. Not a lot, but enough that the paper shook. "This," Frederick whispered. His voice was a strangled croak. "This is a joke, a forgery." "It's not a forgery," I said, my voice cutting through the restaurant's ambient noise. "It's a signed contract. I start Monday. I'm leading the design team for the new waterfront park project." "The waterfront project?" Philip choked on his water. "We bid on that. Dad, didn't we lose that bid last month?" "Shut up, Philip," Frederick roared. The restaurant went silent. Heads turned from nearby tables. The waiters froze. Frederick never raised his voice in public. He was too concerned with image, but he was losing control. He looked at me, his eyes bulging with betrayal. "Sterling, you went to Sterling, my enemy." "I went to the only firm in the city that judged me on my merit, not your lies," I replied calmly. "I know about the emails, Dad. I know you told Kaufman and the others to toss my application. I know you tried to blacklist me." Elena gasped. "Frederick, is that true?" "I was trying to teach her a lesson." Frederick slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "She needed to be humbled. She needed to learn her place." "My place isn't in your shadow, and it certainly isn't in your mailroom," I said. "My place is at a firm that respects me." "You are ungrateful," Frederick hissed, leaning over the table, his face twisted into a mask of ugly fury. "I fed you, I clothed you, I paid for your school." "You paid for nothing," I corrected him. "I took out loans for the last 3 years because you cut me off when I refused to change my major to business. And as for the freshman year tuition, you constantly hold over my head." I reached into my purse and pulled out the second item, a check. It was the entirety of my signing bonus. It was a staggering amount of money for a 24-year-old, but I didn't care. I wanted to be clean. I wanted to be free. I placed the check on top of the offer let. "There. That covers freshman year with interest," I said, "and it covers tonight's dinner, because I'm not eating with you." I stood up. My legs were shaking, not from fear, but from the adrenaline of finally letting go. "You can keep the barely passed bag," I said, looking down at them. Philip looked stunned, his mouth hanging open. Sophia had stopped recording, her phone lowered to the table. Elena looked terrified, realizing the dynamic had just shifted violently. And Frederick looked small. For the first time in my life, he didn't look like a titan of industry. He looked like a bitter, aging man who had just realized he played a game of power against his own daughter and lost. "Naomi, sit down," Frederick commanded, though his voice lacked its usual authority. "You walk out that door and you are done in this family. You hear me? Done." I picked up my purse. I looked him dead in the eye. "Frederick," I said, using his first name for the first time, "I was done the moment you printed that bag. To the people who gave up on me before I even started, don't worry. I'm done trying to prove anything to you." I turned my back on them. The walk to the exit of Le Bernardin felt like walking through a dream. The silence in the room was absolute. I could feel the eyes of every patron on me, but for once, I didn't feel self-conscious. I felt lighter with every step. I felt the heavy cloak of their expectations slipping off my shoulders. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the cool night air of the city. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with oxygen that tasted sweet. I hailed a cab, gave my address, and collapsed into the backseat. My phone started buzzing before the cab even pulled away from the curb. "Incoming call, Dad. Incoming call, Philip. Incoming call, Elena." I didn't answer. I put the phone on Do Not Disturb, but the notifications kept lighting up the screen. "Philip, are you insane? You just embarrassed us in front of half the city. Come back inside right now." "Elena, Naomi, your father is having chest pains. You need to apologize. This is cruel, even for you." "Frederick, you think Sterling will keep you? Watch what happens tomorrow. You've made a grave mistake, girl. That last text chilled me. Watch what happens tomorrow. I knew Frederick. He wasn't going to take this lying down. He was a scorched earth kind of man. If he couldn't control me, he would destroy me. He would rather I be unemployed and miserable than successful with his rival. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up in my small apartment, pacing, waiting for the other shoe to drop. Had I pushed too hard? Could he actually get my offer rescinded? He had connections. He played golf with senators. Arthur Sterling was powerful, but was he willing to go to war for a junior associate he had just hired? The next morning, I arrived at Sterling and Hallow at 8:00 a.m. sharp for my onboarding, my stomach in knots. I was dressed in my best suit, but I felt like an imposter again. As I walked into the lobby, the receptionist looked up. "Ms. Naomi, Mr. Sterling wants to see you in his office immediately." My heart dropped into my shoes. This was it. Frederick had made a call. I was being let go before I had even started. I walked to the corner office, my hands sweating. The glass door was open. Arthur Sterling was standing by the window, looking out at the skyline. "You wanted to see me, sir?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Arthur turned around. His face was grim. "Close the door, Naomi," he said. I closed it. I stood there, waiting for the axe to fall. "I can explain," I started. "My father." "Your father," Arthur interrupted, "called me at 6:00 a.m. this morning." I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry. I didn't want to bring drama to the firm. I understand if you need to rescind the offer." "Rescind it?" Arthur looked confused. Then he laughed, a dry, sharp bark of a laugh. "Naomi, come look at this." He gestured to his desk. I walked over. On his desk was a legal pad with notes scribbled on it. "He offered me a joint venture on the Midtown Plaza project," Arthur said, tapping the pad. "A project worth millions. He said he'd drop his opposition to our zoning permit if I agreed to one condition." "That you fire me," I whispered. "That I fire you," Arthur confirmed. "He told me you stole proprietary information from his home. He told me you were mentally unstable and a liability. He lied, blatantly and desperately." "I didn't steal anything," I said quickly. "I swear." "I know you didn't," Arthur said firmly. "Because I know Frederick. Men like him think everyone has a price. He thinks he can buy my integrity with a zoning permit. He thinks he can buy your future." Arthur picked up the legal pad and ripped the top sheet off. He crumpled it into a ball and tossed it into the trash can. "I told him to go to hell," Arthur said, "and I told him that if he ever contacts me about you or if he tries to interfere with your career in any way, I will sue him for tortious interference and defamation. And I have the lawyers to win." I felt tears prick my eyes, real tears this time, of relief and gratitude. "But," Arthur continued, his expression hardening, "you need to know something else. When I checked into his claims this morning, I found out the extent of it. It wasn't just the emails to Kaufman. Frederick had your name removed from the Dean's List publication at your university last year. He's a donor, so they complied. He's been erasing your achievements systematically." I gasped. I had worked so hard for that Dean's List spot. I thought it was a clerical error when my name wasn't there. "He wanted you to feel small," Arthur said. "He wanted you to believe you were barely passing so you wouldn't aim high. It was psychological warfare, Naomi." The rage I felt then was different from the night before. Last night was personal hurt. This was cold, objective fury. He had messed with my academic record. He had messed with my livelihood. He had actively tried to gaslight me into thinking I was mediocre when I was exceptional. "Thank you for telling me," I said, my voice steadying into a low, dangerous register. "What are you going to do?" Arthur asked. "I'm going to work," I said. "I'm going to design the best damn waterfront park this city has ever seen. And I'm going to make sure that when people look at the skyline, they see my name, not his." "Good answer," Arthur smiled. "Now go get set up. You have a team meeting at 10. I walked out of that office with a new mission. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was building a case. Frederick thought he had power because he had money, but I had the truth, I had the talent, and now I had a powerful ally. But the war wasn't over. Frederick was humiliated, and a humiliated narcissist is the most dangerous creature on earth. I knew he would try one last, public attempt to destroy me. He wouldn't be able to help himself. And I would be ready. 6 months later, the moment of reckoning arrived. It didn't happen in a courtroom or a boardroom, but under the crystal chandeliers of the grand ballroom at the annual City Architecture and Design Gala. This was the biggest night of the year for our industry. Every major developer, architect, and city official was there. It was a night of tuxedos, backslapping, and million-dollar deals whispered over champagne. I hadn't wanted to go. The thought of seeing my family again made my stomach turn. I had maintained absolute radio silence since the night at Le Bernardin. I had blocked their numbers, filtered their emails, and even moved to a new apartment in a neighborhood Frederick considered too bohemian to visit. I was safe in my bubble of hard work and new friends. But Arthur Sterling insisted. "You're not just an employee, Naomi," he had told me earlier that afternoon, adjusting his bow tie in the mirror of his office. "You're the lead architect on the waterfront project. The city is buzzing about your design. You need to be seen. You need to take your victory lap." So I went. I wore a deep emerald green gown that was sleek, structural, and commanded attention, a far cry from the ill-fitting blazer I had worn to the graduation dinner. I wore my hair up, exposing my neck, a sign of vulnerability that I had turned into a display of confidence. As I walked into the ballroom on Arthur's arm, I felt the shift in the room. People were looking, not because I was Frederick's daughter, but because I was the fresh talent everyone was talking about. The N-Rose mystery had been solved, and the narrative had shifted. I wasn't the nepotism baby. I was the defector who had joined the rival team and produced brilliance. I spotted them almost immediately. They were holding court near the bar, as always. Frederick looked older. His skin was grayer, his posture less rigid. The last 6 months hadn't been kind to his business. Rumors had circulated that he was losing bids left and right, his old-school bullying tactics no longer working in a market that demanded transparency and innovation. Elena was there, her smile tight and brittle, scanning the room for people more important than the ones she was currently talking to. Philip was frantically typing on his phone, looking stressed. I tried to steer clear, moving toward the buffet with Arthur, but the room was only so big. It was inevitable. The collision happened just after the main awards presentation. I had just been mentioned by name during the Emerging Talent speech, not a win, but an honorable mention that drew loud applause. As I stepped off the small riser where the nominees had gathered, Frederick stepped directly into my path. The chatter around us died down instantly. The circle of people nearby, competitors, clients, city council members, went silent. Everyone knew the history. Everyone knew the bad blood between Frederick and Arthur. And now, the father and daughter were face to face. "Naomi," Frederick said. His voice was loud, projected for an audience. He was smiling, but his eyes were dead. "Congratulations on the mention, though I suppose honorable mention is just a polite way of saying second place, isn't it?" I felt the old heat rise in my cheeks, the reflex to shrink away. But then I remembered the barely passed bag. I remembered the email to Kaufman. I remembered the library nights. "Hello, Frederick," I said coolly. "It's good to see you. I hear business has been slow." Frederick's smile faltered. A vein in his temple throbbed. "Business is fine. We focus on quality, not flashy, unstable trends. Speaking of which..." He took a step closer, invading my personal space. "I've been looking at the renderings for this waterfront park of yours. It looks remarkably familiar." Here it was, the desperate play. "Does it?" I asked, holding my ground. "It does," Frederick announced, turning to look at the crowd gathering around us. He raised his voice. "In fact, it looks exactly like a concept we were developing at my firm 2 years ago. A concept I discussed at the dinner table many times. It's funny how you leave the family, and suddenly Sterling has a design that mimics my intellectual property. The accusation hung in the air like toxic smoke. He was accusing me of corporate espionage. He was trying to destroy my reputation in front of the entire city. If I was branded a thief, my career was over. Arthur stepped forward, his face red with anger. "Frederick, that is a baseless lie, and you know it. That design is original." "Is it?" Frederick sneered. "Or did she just take the sketches from my home office? She always was a bit sticky-fingered, desperate for approval. Sad, really." Philip, emboldened by his father, chimed in. "I remember those sketches, Dad. She used to look at them all the time." I looked at Philip. Then I looked at Frederick. I saw the desperation in their eyes. They knew I was winning, and they were trying to flip the board. But they had made a fatal error. They assumed I was still the girl who didn't keep receipts. "That's an interesting theory, Frederick," I said, my voice projecting clearly through the silent ballroom. "But there's a problem with your timeline." I reached into my clutch. I didn't have a dossier this time, but I had my phone. I unlocked it and tapped a few times, bringing up a photo album. I turned the screen toward the group of onlookers, specifically toward the city planner standing nearby. "This," I said, pointing to the screen, "is a photo of my initial sketch for the vertical gardens used in the waterfront project. The timestamp on this photo is 4 years ago, November 12th. I swiped. "This is a photo of the 3D model I built in my dorm room. Timestamp, 3 years ago." I swiped again. "And this," I said, stopping on a screenshot, "is an email I sent to you, Frederick, during my sophomore year. I sent you this concept, asking for your feedback. You replied, 'See here,' with 3 words, 'derivative, impractical, trash.'" I looked up from the phone, locking eyes with him. "You didn't develop this concept, Frederick. You rejected it. You called it trash. And now that the city council has approved it, and now that it's being hailed as the future of urban design, suddenly you want to claim it." I laughed, a dry, incredulous sound. "You can't have it both ways. Either I'm the failure you gave a barely passed bag to, or I'm the genius you're trying to steal from. Which is it?" The crowd murmured. People were whispering. The city planner leaned in to look at the timestamps. "He called it trash," someone whispered loudly. "That's definitely his email address," another voice said. Frederick's face turned a violent shade of purple. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny it, to spin a new lie, but nothing came out. He was cornered by his own digital footprint and his own arrogance. "And one more thing," I added, stepping closer to him, lowering my voice just enough so it felt intimate, yet audible to everyone. "You told everyone I was unstable. You told Dean Miller to take me off the dean's list. You blacklisted me. You did everything in your power to ensure I couldn't stand here tonight." I gestured to the room, to the awards, to the respect I had earned. "But here I am, standing on my own 2 feet, while you stand there, trying to take credit for the work of a daughter you were ashamed of." Elena tried to grab Frederick's arm. "Frederick, let's go, we're leaving." But Frederick shook her off. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You are nothing," he hissed. "Without my name, you are nothing." "Actually," Arthur Sterling interjected, stepping up beside me and placing a hand on my shoulder. "She is the future of this firm, and effective tomorrow, she is our newest junior partner. Her name will be on the door, not yours." The gasp in the room was audible. Partner, at 24, it was unheard of. Frederick looked as if he had been slapped. He looked at Arthur, then at me. He looked at the crowd, realizing he had lost the audience completely. They weren't looking at him with respect anymore. They were looking at him with pity and disgust. He turned on his heel without a word and stormed toward the exit. Philip and Elena scrambled to follow him, like rats fleeing a sinking ship. As the heavy doors swung shut behind them, the ballroom was silent for 1 heartbeat, 2 heartbeats. Then someone started clapping. It was the city planner. Then the mayor joined in, then the rest of the room. It wasn't polite applause. It was an ovation. They were clapping for the design, yes, but they were mostly clapping for the takedown. I stood there, trembling slightly as the adrenaline crashed, but I didn't look down. I looked up at the lights, at the people, and finally at Arthur. "Did you mean that?" I asked him over the applause. "About partner." Arthur grinned. "We'll talk about the equity buy-in later, but yes, you earned it." The fallout was swift and brutal, exactly as Arthur had predicted. In the weeks following the gala, Frederick's reputation went into freefall. The architecture world is small, and word travels fast. The story of him trying to claim his daughter's work, coupled with the revelation of his malicious blacklisting, made him radioactive. Clients began to pull contracts. They didn't want to be associated with a man who cannibalized his own family for sport. 2 major city bids that Frederick had been counting on were awarded to other firms, one of them to Sterling and Hallow. I heard through the grapevine that the financial strain cracked the family facade wide open. Elena, realizing the money tap was tightening, filed for divorce 3 months later. She cited irreconcilable differences, but everyone knew she was just securing her assets before the ship went down completely. Philip was quietly let go from the firm. Apparently, without Frederick's absolute power to protect him, his incompetence became a liability the board of directors wouldn't tolerate. He ended up moving to another state, working in sales for a cement supply company. As for me, I didn't answer their calls, and there were calls. When the divorce news hit, Frederick left me a voicemail. He sounded drunk. He rambled about legacy and family sticking together. He didn't apologize. He just wanted me to come back and help him save the firm. He wanted to use my new reputation to patch the holes in his sinking ship. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the end. I was too busy building. The waterfront park project broke ground in the spring. It was a massive undertaking, a complex network of elevated walkways, vertical gardens, and community spaces built over an old industrial district. It was designed to be a place where people could come together, where nature reclaimed the concrete. On the day of the grand opening, a year after that terrible graduation dinner, I stood on the central observation deck. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the steel and glass. Children were running through the fountains I had sketched on napkins. Couples were walking hand in hand along the paths I had fought to protect in budget meetings. It was real. It wasn't a barely passed life. It was a masterpiece. I felt a presence beside me. I turned to see Arthur Sterling, holding 2 glasses of champagne. "A toast," he said, handing me one. "To the project?" I asked. "To the architect," he corrected. We clinked glasses. The sound was crisp and clear. "You know," Arthur said, looking out at the city, "I received a package at the office for you today. It didn't have a return address, but I think I know who it's from." I stiffened. What was it? Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. "Just this note, and a check." I took the note. The handwriting was shaky, familiar, but diminished. It was Frederick S. "You were right, the math was wrong. F." The check was for the exact amount of the signing bonus I had thrown on the table that night at Le Bernardin. He was returning the money. It wasn't an apology. A man like Frederick was incapable of a true apology, but it was an admission. It was a surrender. He was acknowledging that the debt was paid, that he had no hold over me, and that he had miscalculated my value entirely. I looked at the check. It was a lot of money. Money that could buy a new car, a down payment on a house, a luxury vacation. But I didn't want his money. I didn't want anything from him ever again. I took the check and the note. I walked over to the edge of the observation deck, where the wind was whipping off the harbor. "What are you doing?" Arthur asked, though he was smiling as if he already knew. "Balancing the ledger," I said. I tore the check into tiny pieces, then I tore the note, I-open-E. D my hand and let the wind catch the confetti of paper. I watched as the white scraps danced in the air, swirling down toward the water below, disappearing into the dark current. It was over. The anger, the need to prove myself, the weight of the barely passed bag, it was all gone, carried away by the wind. I turned back to Arthur, back to the park filled with people, back to the life I had built brick by brick, entirely on my own terms. "So," I said, taking a sip of champagne, "what's the next project?" Arthur grinned. "How do you feel about libraries?" I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile that reached all the way to my eyes. "I love libraries. Let's build the best one the world has ever seen." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, illuminating the city I was helping to shape, I knew one thing for certain. I hadn't just passed. I had soared.